you did a POE, post-occupancy evaluation. My question was, what were the learning, what did you learn from POE that you're going to change for your next building? And the other thing about my question was, how much of the passive design itself, whatever is included, the role of the architects that is designing the passive strategies, the overhang, wherever you're putting the overhang in your south facade, which is in west, is going to be more complicated, or you're going to have a very long one, or you have to go as you have your shutters. So how much influence was only in the design and then using all the, let's say, energy efficiency things? So two questions. What's the POE and the other passive?
In terms of the Quebec scheme, we're just very early days in terms of POE, so we haven't learned all the lessons from that by any means yet. But what we did do was the previous 3 projects that we worked on, so from 2009 to 2016, we were working on various schemes, and from that, it really was about, when we first started, it was eco-bling. We threw literally everything in the kitchen sink at a scheme. And by the time we got to the last scheme, it was very much about trying to hone it down to what the residents could really work with and how they could work. So it was, it became clear quite evidently to us that it was about simple design, simple detailing, fabric first, and really relying on PV or some simple form of renewable energy to make that work. And that worked very well for our resident group, social housing group at that time. When we're looking at the market now, it is the same requirements. People want to be able to operate their homes really easily. So for us, that's what we learned from our previous schemes. We'll no doubt learn different things, and I think about the quality of build will come out from the post-occupancy evaluation we're doing in terms of Quebec. On the second part, I think Paul's probably better to answer in terms of the other part.
Is that working? Yes. So in terms of the overshading strategies, it really did follow on from the work that Jonathan had been doing previously, where the feedback was keep it simple. It was about trying to come up with solutions that were as passive as possible, and didn't have the mechanisms that might go wrong later in the day. So the west facing was definitely a challenge, because you have to try and avoid the low afternoon sun. You've obviously had the day where you've got heat building up through the day, and then you've got the low sun coming in through your windows, and it's that heat on heat that becomes the problem. And also, we didn't want to necessarily cover the windows, because obviously you get no daylight. But we wanted to make sure that there was a way that you could really effectively cut out that afternoon sun, and the shutters were the most effective way that we could find of achieving that. And although we looked at other means and other methods, that was really the only way we could be sure. And I think it's that risk factor that the app brought out in many ways, was that can you be certain? How certain are you that this will work? And that was really the only one that I think stuck out. Other issues such as treated glass and everything just were not provable enough to meet those requirements.
Jim Clark, Policy Connect. We've done reports and advocated for greater energy efficiency policy in Westminster. David there showed some of the great examples of the things that they've been doing to retrofit, and what our Dutch friends have been doing with Energiesprong. What can the UK government do to encourage the uptake of these things? We're constantly having meetings with the Bays about it. They're always concerned about cost. What's the cost like?
David.
There aren't any magical solutions here. The Dutch have shown the model works, and they, I believe, during the course of this year, will hit the 2,000 or 3,000th retrofit. They are claiming, I'm yet to see all the evidence, that they are nearly subsidy-free, because scale is what is important here. You've got to industrialize it. And when I mean subsidy-free, that means the Housing Association looking at what they will spend over the next 30 years. That isn't to say they've necessarily budgeted for it, yeah? But what they will end up spending and being honest to themselves. And, of course, there has to be an element of, if you're lowering energy bills to the tenants to such an extent, then it is perfectly legitimate to put a comfort charge back onto that, such that they don't end up with some tenants in old homes that are paying huge amount and some paying virtually nothing. All of these elements are important, but what does government need to do? The concept is pretty well proven this can work, but we need help from the 1 or 2 to the industrialisation. And so the ask is for gap funding to allow an industry to develop and thrive and drive those costs down so that funding can be withdrawn. And without that gap funding, which currently is provided via the European projects, it would simply stop again. So the appeal to the government is, it looks like it works, there's a lot to be done, the prize is huge, so gap funding, please.
Rajat, do you have anything to add to that?
I agree with
Briefly.
David. I think one of the other means of providing evidence to the government is learning from those post-occupancy evaluations, because that will establish the value of what David's been talking about. If you can quantify the health outcomes of these homes, the livability aspects, I think those are much bigger things that the government would be interested in.
Might we have a last question? Is there a last question out there someplace? Howell, no answers to that question that was asked about what could the government do? No, but if you were advising the government on what to do, could you give the microphone to Howell?
Thank you, George. I'll take the hospital pass. I think, everything David says, and we need a degree of certainty and sticking to policy, which is difficult when they don't know what the policy is, frankly, from 1 week to the next at the moment. But you can't expect investors to industrialize anything if you don't give them a long run. I'm not the only one saying that. The Committee on Climate Change have been quite blunt about that over the last 9 months. They said it in their annual report last year, government must stop chopping and changing, and they picked on zero carbon homes as an example chop and change policy. And they've come out again in their report on the fitness or lack of fitness of the UK stock that came out a couple of Thursdays ago. And they've been quite clear there's got to be some certainty of policy trajectory if we're going to make progress. I think that's the big ask, and that's difficult for politicians.
A hand for our speakers.